In Los Angeles, you've got the Bloods versus the Crips. In New York, you've got the Woos versus the Chews. And in San Andreas, you've got Grove Street versus the Ballers. But for today's story, we are heading over to Chicago. More specifically, the South Side, where the GDs, or Gangster Disciples, face off against their most hated ops, the BDs, or Black Disciples. And whilst these gangs have a rich history that goes all the way back to the 60s, back then you were more likely to get drilled in Chicago by John Dillinger than Lil Durk. But today's story isn't just about the BDs and the GDs warring, because in the decades that followed the formation of these Chicago gangs, local soldiers and their most hated ops splintered off into smaller sects based on the various blocks all around Chicago, with some of these sets counting your favorite rappers as their members. Among the BDs are famous Chirac drill legends Lil Reese and Lil Durk, hailing from the Lamron set of the Black Disciples, named Lamron because they hail from Normal Avenue, and Lamron is normal spelled backwards. You see, sometimes you can be a G and an anagram lover at the same time. And amongst other star-studded members of the Black Disciples include one-time Drake fascination and muscle 600 Breezy, and incarcerated former Savage Rondo No. 9, with both of those throwing up the 600 set, referring to the crew of BDs that come from the 0600 block in Chicago. And then of course we have the famous O Block, a gang and block which has been described as the most dangerous in Chicago. Home of course to perhaps the most famous Chicago driller in history, Chief Keef. And naturally this story's protagonist, or villain depending on how you look at it, King Von, who was apparently very close to Chief Keef, both growing up in the O Block of Chicago. So King Von has been known to be a member of the BD's O Block set, and he seems to have been putting in work from early. And while Von says that he never strictly joined a gang, he says that he was born into the culture and it's all he knew growing up.
Oh, I ain't joined one. It's just like, since I'm over here, you see what I'm saying? You is where you at. Like if you would have grew up, if you would have been born where I'm at, you would have been had to be gang bang.
Now, King Von is no stranger to being in trouble with the law. He did around 2 years in juvie as a teen, and racking up armed robbery and carjacking charges while he was still a juvenile, fortunately managing to finesse his way out of a longer stint in jail by taking boot camp.
They locked me up for a robbery, armed robbery and armed carjack. They said I robbed somebody to their car.
This is something you were able to beat back then?
Right, they dropped the charge, they dropped most of them and let me go for boot camp. I was too young.
Now, in case you don't know, a boot camp is kind of like a really tough prison program for youngsters, where you essentially opt to go to a really tough military-style jail in exchange for doing less time. Now, I've got no doubt that going off to a boot camp program is a punishing experience that would turn anybody into a real tough guy. And I think it's more than likely that this experience must have played a part in turning King Von from the soft-spoken street kid to a fully-blown Chirac savage. So, by the time King Von was released back on these streets, he'd become a hardened thug ready to put in work for his BD brothers. And so in the years that followed, King Von would end up getting associated with more gangster shit than a toilet at a G-Unit studio. Now, when you build an entire rap persona based on how much of a tough guy gangster killer you are, it's only natural that people are going to start speculating on just how many people you've iced. Now, for most gangster rappers that you get to know through their music, chances are they've never really caught a body. Hell, after all of that snitching and getting all those bloods taken off the street, 6ix9ine has probably saved more lives than he's killed. But King Von appears to be different. The premier drill community on Reddit, Chiracology, is filled with numerous references and question threads pondering just how many bodies King Von might have. Some have conservatively estimated only 2, while other more outrageous posts suggest his body count could be all the way up at 7. But if you think that's the only incriminating content we can find about King Von on Reddit, then you, sir, are mistaken. Because it appears over the course of his drilling career, King Von has become a prolific self-snitcher, dropping numerous clues or even out-and-out boasts about bodies that he has supposedly caught over the years. In fact, in 2012, he was bragging to King Op Wooski, that's Op by name and by nature, with Wooski being one of King Von's longest-running ops, who he was still going back and forth with as recently as 2020. But back in 2012, Von and Wooski were going back and forth on Twitter, with Von bragging about having more bodies and attempts than Wooski's, calling him his son. Now, Wooski clapped back telling Von to ask somebody about his background, and so I decided to consult Chiracology about Wooski's background. Now, over there, they can attribute 2 points to Wooski when he was young. I mean, apparently, even as young as 12, Wooski was promoting himself on social media as a killer with this ominous picture. With this apparently coming out after a 29-year-old man called Reezy, a member of the BD block Wick City, which was later renamed O Block, was shot in the back and didn't make it during a huge gang brawl, with online speculation suggesting that Wooski may have been the trigger man, and this happening all the way back when he was 11, 12 or 13 depending on who you speak to. Though for the record, this is not proven and has been debated. But since we're talking points, another body that has apparently been attributed to Wooski is a chap named Platoon. This refers to an October 2011 shooting of a man in his early 20s called Edward Riley, supposedly from O Block, gunned down whilst walking with his girlfriend. occurred. And this was a drilling apparently so savage that even a witness had an asthma attack and had to be taken to the hospital. So Wooski does seem to have a couple of bodies on him, but how does King Von stack up in comparison? Well, when this Twitter murder measuring contest popped off in 2012, supposedly this wasn't long after the slaying of 17-year-old Richard Modell, also known as Modell McCambry or just Modell, who was fatally hit in the chest during a shooting, an incident where his cousin was also hit, being taken to the hospital with gunshot wounds, but ultimately surviving, with some rumours even floating around that this cousin of his was Wooski himself. Now, a lot of people pointed the finger of accusation at King Von in this incident, with Von himself even tweeting, "Who do you think turned Jar Jar Block into Modell World?" A reference to the regular practice of Chicago blocks being renamed after fallen soldiers when they get gunned down. So Von's involvement with Modell's death is a long-running rumour, but once again has not been proven. But of course, it was Von who was bragging to Wooski about how many bodies he has. And there is yet another early killing that many have tried to link to Von, one of which is the death of P5 from Jaro City, a drilling that took the life of a 23-year-old man named Derek Johnson on 6200 block. Now, once again, this is just a rumour and there is no evidence or clues against Von for these incidents, other than his own incriminating tweets. And all of this should be taken with a pinch of salt as just mere internet detective work and gangster forum speculation. However, to be fair, Von is the one talking to Wooski publicly on Twitter about he's got more bodies than him. And that was all the way back in 2012 before he had ever spat a bar on the mic. And as the years went by between 2012 and 2014, Von would continue to attract the interest of internet detectives, and the bodies in Chirac would continue to pile up. Now, if you're a follower of Chicago gang law or Chicago drill music in general, there is a name that might sound familiar to you. That's Tuka, a nickname for a real boy named Shondale Gregory. Now, Tuka was an infamously murdered member of the GDs who was killed at a bus stop on the south side of Chicago in 2011, gunned down by masked killers in a drive-by when he was only 15 years old. And Tuka's killing had a massive impact on Chicago gang culture in the years that followed. And not just because Chief Keef, his boys, and many other people in the rap game going forward would famously taunt their GD rivals by saying that they were smoking on Tuka Pack. So after Tuka's killing, the set of the GDs that he belonged to, STL or St. Lawrence Boys, changed their name to Tukaville out of respect. And in retaliation for the killing of Tuka, a teenage female shooter from the newly named Tukaville squad allegedly rode out for Tuka's memory, killing a man named O.D. Perry in retaliation. More on the young female shooter who did that in a minute. Anyway, after this retaliation, King Von's most hated op, Wooski, was bragging about this incident publicly on Twitter. So in response to the tragic slaying of OD, the block that Chief Keef and King Von called home was renamed O Block in his memory. And in the years that follow, plenty of bloodshed takes place between the O Block BDs and the Tukaville GDs. Now, jump forward to 2014, as drill music begins to proliferate the gang culture and drill rappers begin to use songs as opportunities to diss their ops. Tuka's cousin Lil Mark releases a scathing diss track called No Competition, taking aim at numerous BD ops over in O Block and beyond. And this is a song that some people were calling the hardest diss track in Chicago at the time. Apparently Tuka's bro Lil Mark's hatred of the ops stretched far back beyond his brother's slaying, with one of his day one homies Zico from 051 set having been killed by the ops in an altercation outside of a McDonald's as early as 2009. So it's safe to say that Lil Mark didn't have a shred of respect for his ops and was looking to go as hard as he possibly could on them, whether in the streets or on wax. However, unfortunately for Lil Mark, the diss song No Competition ended up getting him a little more attention than he bargained for. And within 4 days of that song dropping, Lil Mark was shot dead at a bus stop, a scene that was eerily similar to the fate Tuka suffered. And this was apparently a brutal attack in which Lil Mark was shot in the head from behind, walk-up style, with a witness describing the assailant as using a gun with an extended clip. And in the aftermath of this killing, all eyes were on King Von. Why do you ask? Well, funnily enough, 6 hours after that killing, Von made the incredibly incriminating tweet, "Smoker op, now we back at it," as well as going on to tweet that he was finna celebrate with his boys that evening. But in his defense, that doesn't necessarily mean he had anything to do with it, because Von wasn't the only BD celebrating that drilling. D Rose of 600 Block returned to the crime scene to make social media posts.
Hey, it's a took off 51st! Damn, body down. Oh, not gonna see.
And Lil Durk was even seen at that very bus stop making jokes about this being a special place.
Hey, this bus stop right here though, this is a real famous place, yeah? It's a real famous place, baby.
But once again, for legal reasons, there is absolutely no proof or convictions linking King Von to this act, except for these really incriminating tweets. However, there is one body that internet detectives have tried to pin on Von harder than anybody, perhaps purely for the reason it's a story so interesting that you almost just want it to be true. I'm talking, of course, about the teenage Chirac assassin that many people have described as the real-life Snoop from The Wire. I'm talking, of course, about Jakira Key Barnes. Now you can kind of understand why so many mainstream media outlets have reported on the life and death of Jakira Key Barnes, because Key's story is so damn wild. She was described by the Daily Mail as the real-life Snoop from The Wire, an article which referred to her supposedly having caught 2 bodies before she even turned 14, one supposedly being a 16-year-old boy slain in 2013, and another in 2014, supposedly a rapper called Blood Money, apparently a cousin of Chief Keef. I mean, this girl was wild. Screw Drake talking about 25 or 25 mil, because Key was 17 with 17 kills. Damn, baby, when you said you had 17 bodies by 17, I kind of lost respect for you, but now I know that you were killing people, I'm scared. So, how does Key fit into the King Von story? Well, let's start at the beginning, because apparently when Key was a child, her little homie, a distant cousin who she treated like a blood brother, named Taekwon, was killed just age 13, apparently an innocent bystander in a shootout. And it was supposedly this tragic and unexplainable killing that turned Key into the heartless villain that she eventually became.
And that's why she called herself Taekwon Assassin on Twitter.
Now combine that with the fact, apparently she'd been a friend of Tuka, the young GD that was famously hated by O Block, and from the same block as Key, which was of course later renamed Tukaville after he was killed. In fact, do you remember when I said that in revenge for Tuka's killing, a man named O.D. Perry was murdered in retaliation by a young female assassin? Well, supposedly, Key was that assassin.
Police believe that she killed this kid in retaliation for her friend Tuka being murdered early that year. It gave her a giant reputation as a shooter.
Hell, Key's reputation as a young hitter for the Chicago GDs ended up making her the topic of an A&E TV documentary called The Secret Life of a Gang Girl. And even more crazy than that, King Von was even interviewed for this documentary in a segment that was apparently all about how he'd slid into her DMs and tried to bang her despite her being from the op block.
I was trying to first.
And get this, even in that actual documentary, one of her friends said that even Key thought that he was trying to kill her.
He liked her as a girlfriend?
Yeah, he wanted to be her boyfriend. She just felt like he was trying to set her up and kill her. That's what she told me. She's like, I think he's just trying to kill me.
But why on earth would King Von want to kill Key, apart from the obvious reason that she's an op? Well, one of the wildest parts of this story is the fact that like most Chirac villains with bodies under their belt, eventually the Screets did catch up with Key, and she too would end up suffering the same fate that she had supposedly dealt out to so many others, with her eventually being shot dead in 2014. But given the nature of her wild past, internet detectives were hell-bent on getting more information about the circumstances surrounding her slaying, with one 4chan user arguably going a little bit too far, hacking her Twitter account after her passing and unveiling some juicy clues. With a number of her supposed private Twitter DMs, combined with a number of public tweets, numerous wild details about her private life were uncovered. For example, DMs leaked that appeared to show Key offering to do a hit on Lil Herb for $10,000. And just like we learned in that documentary, King Von apparently becoming infatuated with Key after running into her with some BDs on a train, where she apparently duly received a beatdown from her ops. Now weirdly, from here, apparently these two begun to flirt regularly on Twitter, both publicly and privately in the DMs, with King Von regularly oscillating between trying to smash this female savage from the op block, calling her wifey, sliding into her DMs, talking about when this is all over with, he's gonna have her, even getting possessive enough to tell her she's only supposed to be messing with him, all the way up to goading her to give him his location so that him and his boys can catch her slipping. And going over these conversations, sometimes it's unclear when these two are flirting, whether they were trying to kill each other or fuck each other. For example, here she says, "When are we linking?" followed by a bunch of gun emojis. And even Von himself seems unsure as to whether he's going to be shooting a load or a clip. Here we see Von saying that he wanted to see her often, and she says she's been riding out and not seeing anyone, with Von replying saying that he wants to see her often, with her replying saying that Von's gang is trying to set her down and set her up, with her swearing on Tuka that she's going to see him. To me, it sounds like he's trying to smash and she's trying to shoot. Anyway, from all these exchanges, it is very unclear as to whether this flirting was about love or violence. And that is kind of the point. I mean, if you were some sort of Chirac assassin with a bunch of bodies under your belt, I would think you would probably be attracted to somebody you have something in common with. And at times, it seemed like the flirtations and threats of gang retaliation almost went hand in hand. Like this exchange where it appears like Von and Key are teasing each other about how accurate their aim is with the pistol before Von really jumps the gun and just offers her some dick. Thing is, at a certain point, all of Von's bragging about how much savagery he's done in the streets goes a little bit far. At one point he says, "You know about the other shit that I did to your side," as well as a comment saying, "Ask your boy Modell," both possible references to that body that dropped shortly before Von was bragging about how many bodies he got to his old op Wooski. All of the exchanges between these two are incredibly ominous, and unfortunately for Key, the ops did eventually catch up with her taking her life, with her shooting happening apparently only 20 minutes after she supposedly tweeted her location a hangout spot for her fellow gang homies. Now, since this passing, King Von has dropped dropped various tweets and lyrics that have led the internet detectives to speculate that he might have been responsible. For example, on the track War With Us, he drops a lyric referencing putting a pretty op bitch in the mall. But the most ominous detail about this entire fiasco came from that original 4chan hack, with the person who had originally claimed to have hacked into Key's Twitter account saying that just as they were planning to log out of the account for good, they saw that Key had received a DM from an old friend that apparently said, "I wish you could reply back." And so the hacker decided to reply to this friend with one simple question: who do you think did it? To which that sent one final creepy reply: King Von did it.